and there's stuff going on that is not being discussed, but it is being done nevertheless. I'll give you a concrete example. I think we spoke, the three of us, even how the Balkans were being rigged to become the second front in West's war against Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very visible, and people in the region were very nervous. The provocations were kind of escalating between Serbs, Croats, and Muslims for something to break out. Croatia got pushed into a completely moronic military alliance with Albania and Bulgaria. Nothing to do with them. I mean, that would be like putting the United States in a military alliance with, I don't know, Chad or Peru. It just doesn't make
Right.
a whole lot of sense. And in the last few months, I've been getting kind of like impressions, indirect news that things are improving actually in Bosnia and Herzegovina since Trump took over. And I heard that from a number of Croatian politicians in Bosnia and a number of Serbian politicians, analysts, these people who do podcasts and stuff, but nothing terribly concrete. And so then the other day, like 5 days ago, I was in no, a week ago, I was in Istanbul, in Turkey, at a conference where there was a member of the cabinet of the Serbian government in Bosnia, right? And I thought, okay, cool, I'm going to ask him. And so I went and I talked to him, and I said to him, look, I've been getting these kind of vague notions that things are kind of, is this actually true? And the whole point was, since Trump came to power. And he shot right back, nothing vague, nothing ambivalent. He was like, oh yeah, things have radically improved. It's like night and day. So all the actions that the Brits did, and people there appreciate that it was the Brits. Mm. They absolutely, they're not confused about this. He was saying they've taken a step after step after step to antagonize the Serbs, because they wanted to kind of wage this war against Serbia, because they felt that if they drew Serbia into some kind of a rash reaction, that's how they could draw Russia into coming into the war to back up Serbia. Mm-hmm. And so they've been progressively antagonizing the Serbian leadership and imposing sanctions on their politicians and companies and banks, and Trump administration came in, and then in the space of about 7 days, I'm not saying 7 days since Trump came into the White House, but at some point in course of time, in the space of 7 days, they took all of these measures down. It's like all the sanctions are off. You're good. And so suddenly now, like the Serbs can breathe. The provocations died down. The provocations between Muslims against Croats, Muslims, Serbs. All of these mutual provocations that were going on an escalation basis. It all died down, and then the minister also told me about some lithium deposits that they have there. And he was saying the Brits were extremely aggressive, wanting to take over those deposits. Mm-hmm. And then he said, for our governments, we have two priorities. One of them is we want to not cause environmental devastation. We have to protect our waters. Mm-hmm. And two, we want to keep our people in the villages. We don't want the people to abandon the villages. We want them to stay there. So we were negotiating with the Brits, but we were asking that this be done at a certain standard of for protection of the environment. Mm-hmm. And they were kind of like, no, like, we're going to do it our way. Don't worry, just get out of the way, and we're going to do it the way we do it, which means zero environmental standards. Just get the lithium out, collateralize it, and move on. And he says, like, now the Americans have taken this position, and we're negotiating with the American side. This is like completely a different story. They're like, yeah, we can see your point. Yes, it will be important for you to, we appreciate that it's important for you to protect. We'll work with that. And I think that they're talking pretty much like a 50-50 joint venture to everybody's satisfaction. And so the Serbs are like, But that's awesome. And so they can't believe the change. They're saying like this is like night and day between us dealing with the Brits and us dealing with the Americans now. And okay, the point that I'm making is this happened since Trump came into the White House. This can be a random thing, and it's not a small thing because it was going to be a second front in the war against Russia. So to affect all these changes that have happened, you had to appreciate that this was a flashpoint and that somebody was going to detonate this conflict. And you had to tell them, okay, you're out of here. There's a new sheriff in town. Step aside. We're taking over. So you had to know what you were doing. Long story. I'm going back to the point. Are they stupid or do they know what they're doing? I think they're clearly not stupid, which then tells me that a lot of these things that, everybody's heads are exploding about are being handled in a certain way for some reason that somebody thinks is a good idea, rightly or wrongly. But I think that we shouldn't just take the worst the worst case outcome and then extrapolate it to infinity and say like they screwed us over, they betrayed us and everything, because this is clearly not the case. Let's now repeat once more the biggest change. Trump reestablished diplomatic relations with Russia.
Right.
Two of the global biggest nuclear powers. So the greatest risk of us being annihilated in a nuclear Armageddon was the relationship between the United States and Russia. The fact that they are now cordial and constructive has moved us a massive step away from the precipice.
That's right.
So for that thing alone, I think Trump deserves at least a nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize. If that prize was really what we were, what it says on the brochure.
Right.
Second, Trump was being pushed in the direction of war against Iran, a regime change war against Iran. And for a while, everybody was assuming that he was on board, that he was going to go through with it, and that there was going to be a big war between, the United States, Israel, NATO, and Iran. Did that happen? It didn't. His flushing the EU down the toilet, where it belongs. And so let's see. I mean, I could name another few things, but to not keep the long story even longer.
Alex, let me just add something, and then I'm going to come to you, Tom, and ask you about Venezuela, right? Because the other things that he's done is never mind the ceasefire, the peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan, the peace treaty between Cambodia and Thailand, the peace treaty between Rwanda and Congo, where over 5 to 6 million people were killed over 30 years, which the British could keep fermenting in order to extract the resources from those nations, and just horrendous suffering. And he's put a stop to that. That's not the actions of someone who's stupid. That's the actions of someone who has guile, who knows how to play the game. Now, then there's what's happening in Venezuela. You're in the UK, actually anywhere, get a VPN. If you want to be able to access all sorts of perspectives that the government thinks are dangerous for you, get a VPN. nordvpn.com/cryptorich. He's doing extrajudicial killings in Venezuela, Tom. He's brought his 20,000 troops and stuff, and moving ships from the Middle East over to Venezuela. Come on.
That's it. Let's back up before we go there. Let's remind ourselves that Donald Trump is interested in. This is something that it wasn't in the podcast Halsey and I did the other day. We did a short thing with Tommy Kerrigan last Sunday, and Halsey brought up a really great point, which is that the media, and therefore all of the influencers and all the commentators and everybody else, are trained to focus on outcomes, not process. Peace is a process. Reforming the government is a process. Reforming diplomatic relations is a process. But everybody wants to turn every event into an outcome. When those events, every little turn of events into an outcome. My God, Mamdani is one in New York. That's an outcome that it's part of the process. Part of the process on one side, part of the process on the other. Trump understands that this is a process. He's got people in place who understand this process. Listen to Marco Rubio talk. Listen to Tulsi Gabbard talk. Listen to Kash Patel talk. specifically, we were talking about this in terms of the legal process. Patel talks like a cop. I know what Patel talks. I know that lingo. I was raised by one. I know what cops sound like, right? They have to. There are certain things that they can and cannot say in order to maintain the sanctity of the investigation. Okay, it's like listening to CEOs speak on earnings calls. They never tell you anything that you don't already know, right? Because they can't tell you anything, because otherwise they're breaking their fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, and they're giving their competitors information that they don't deserve. But the financial press has to ask the questions. The CEO, they all have to go through the Panama, right? When you have in that case, it's not necessarily a hostile scenario, right, between the financial analyst interviewing asking questions during an earnings call and the CEO or the CTO. But when we're talking about media, and the presidency and particular politicians, you will have you're not going to have that same situation. We clearly have a hostile media working against certain politicians while throwing softballs to other politicians. And the goal of all those questions is to imply outcomes that are not necessarily even on the table. We're about process. All the people commenting on this stuff, no, and this is what it really pisses me off when I watch guys who profess to be lawyers for a freaking living not understand the difference between process and outcome. I mean, I'm over it. I'm like, what are you kidding me? Like, you don't know this stuff? Like, I don't bring my prop cigar with me on these days when I do these when I'm inside for a reason, because I don't want to look like some other jackass who doesn't know how to like try a case in court. So let's not kid ourselves here. So
back to the extrajudicial killings in Venezuela.
No, now let's move to Venezuela. Extrajudicial killings in Venezuela, like in international, killing people in international, killing drug runners in international waters. They deserve like due process in the United States. Not the last I checked under constitutional law. We're at war, and this is where I'm going to be. I'm going to sound like I don't know, fascist Tom. I don't really care anymore. Like, because it's nice that y'all we can all have these nice cordial conversations, but at the end of the day, it ain't your country that's being torn apart at the seams legally and through process and through the managerial state and all these things in order to try and destroy the what's left of the rule of law, the West, civilization, little things like that. So sorry. As far as Venezuela is concerned, it's really not all that difficult. I've explained it in other places, and I think we've talked about it a little bit here. Venezuela, as of right now, is not about the oil. Never has been. It's not about the oil in Guyana either. If it's about the oil in Guyana, it's that the British want the oil in Guyana, or Europe wants the oil in Guyana. It's not about that at all. It's because our refineries on the Gulf Coast, those Citgo refineries on the Gulf Coast, are no longer tuned to process Venezuelan sludge anymore. They're all tuned to process Russian Urals grade, because that's what we substituted for when Trump put the original sanctions on Venezuela back in 2018. No, what's going on here is clearly this is about taking away the organized drug and child trafficking trade. This is about taking away upper management's second layer of money, their private money stream, as Ian Burlingame likes to put it. I think
what's your source for that? How do you know that?
It's just the thing that makes the most sense here. He wants the drugs to stop coming into the country, right? We have Maduro, like all of these. Like, it's really funny. Actually, what I'm gonna throw something out at you here that might actually make a lot more sense when we think about this. Let's go back to the Bolshevik Revolution, shall we? This is going to be interesting. We're going to trace this path. I have an unpublished podcast with Richard Poem I'm going to put out tomorrow. But he and I had a great talk about all this stuff the other day, about process and about how the British set these things up and how they helped create the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. And when you listen to Richard talk, you're like, oh, I see the parallels to today. I see the parallels here. I see the parallels there. But here's the interesting part about it. When you stop to reassess the Soviet Union outside of the and all of its geopolitics in the Cold War, post-World War II, Another way of framing a lot of their actions weren't to stop. They weren't involved in things to stop the Americans. They were all very anti-British. The Brits put Israel on the table. So the Palestinians, the PLO, were a Soviet thing. Okay, go around the world and you'll see a lot of this. Okay, I'm not, going to sit here and talk. So now we ask about Castro in Cuba. We ask about whatever was going on in the French in Vietnam. These things, the Soviets I think the Soviets, you could make a very compelling case that a lot of what the Soviets were doing in all of these geopolitical hotspots around the world were actually not fighting the Americans. They were fighting the British, and with the Americans clearly as their proxies, because the British controlled our foreign policy and controlled our monetary policy and controlled all these other things. The stuff that we've been talking about now, together on and off for 4 years now. When you play all those things out, then you have to ask yourself, is Venezuela part of that? Then when you sit down and you talk to a guy like Matt Ehret, who reminds you about the vast web of, and Matt's a better guy to talk to about all this than I am, because he's done all the work on it. But I know that Alex and I have both talked to Matt about these things, about the web of international organized crime. And basically, we were dealing with organized crime diaspora around the world, meaning, as Matt would put it, and he put it to me in a podcast that we did with Dexter White, right, where the reason the Chinese triads are in Vancouver, the reason that the Italian mafia is in New Jersey, the reason that the Mexican cartels are, the Mexican cartels are operating in other places. The reason why all these people, not maybe the Mexican cartels, but all the other ones, the Russian mob is in London, this one's there, because if they went back to their home countries, they'd all be killed. Because they're actually not part of the government. They're not sanctioned by the government. Doesn't want these people running around at home. They would kill them. So they're operating around the world in other places, and almost all of them have direct ties back to all roads lead to London. And I could make and from that, along with all the other things that Trump has been doing, where he attacked all these other things first, it makes sense to me that, Venezuela is probably also part of that. And it's why Venezuela has always been a big problem for Trump, because the Venezuelan-Colombian border has always been a problem, right? So we had the note a couple of weeks ago, where there was the rumor that Maduro offered Trump all the oil and all the gold and everything else, and Trump turned him down. Remember that? Yep. Why did he turn him down? Because Maduro was offering Trump nothing. So it's very typical Davosian, City of London. Hey, I'll offer you this thing that's actually not worth anything, because we don't need that oil. We don't want that oil anymore. And Venezuela doesn't really have all that much gold. And who cares? We have all of Alaska, for Christ's sake, that we haven't even started with. And God knows how much gold is up in Alaska, folks. But I've been around the gold mining space, and I've been around enough investor conferences in gold. I know how much friggin' gold and silver we haven't even begun to look for up in and around Alaska and British Columbia. Riddled, the whole freaking northern Canadian and Alaskan Rockies, insane amounts of gold and silver to be brought to the market if we wanted it. We don't need Venezuela. So they were offering us nothing. That's why Trump turned it down. And then I also heard a report that Tren de Agua said, hey, we'll call off the war against us and we'll fuck off over to Colombia. And Trump was like, yeah, that doesn't work either, because we're going after Colombia next. He is trying to secure the Gulf of America and all the countries around the Gulf of America, because I'm going to tell you, and this is the part that scares me, actually, when I think about it from a geographical perspective. When I start thinking Halford McKinder-esque geopolitics, geographic geopolitics, I'm like, as I've been saying for most of 2025, you look where the worst of the Democrats are entrenched in the United States. Mamdani in New York, along with Kathy Hochul, right? Pritzker in Chicago, Minneapolis, Portland, LA, the whole Northeast. Why they haven't started rebuilding the Francis Scott Key Bridge 2 years after it was run into. It's still sitting there. The mayor of Baltimore won't let the process.
I'm sorry. I have to stop you. That's so unfair. It's only been a year and a half.
Oh, I'm sorry. A year and a half. I apologize, Alex. I don't.
Facts matter, Tom.
Keep me honest, Alex. Keep me honest. You're fair. I'm all good with that, my friend. So all of these things, right? Think about all of that stuff. They are the British. If you're going to break the United States up, if you're going to put the United States into full-on civil war mode, which is where I think we're headed for 2026, depending on what Trump does with the shutdown, then they're activating all of these mayors and all of these governors in all of these states. If you go through and you look at the entirety of where there are Democratic governors, they are starting the process of breaking with any changes to federal law. Like the minute that Bobby Kennedy or Robert F. Kennedy Jr., RFK Jr., changed the rules about health insurance. What's the first thing that happened? All the blue state governors got together. We're going to create a regional thing to, it was the vaccine mandates. We're going, and the vaccine schedule. We're going to form a regional alliance, which defies federal law. So we're going to, and so now all of a sudden these people are champions of states' rights. Like this, you have to watch this stuff from that perspective. So they're working to make an argument so that they can control the ports. So what is Trump doing? He's securing the Gulf of America. Why? The Mississippi River Delta, Florida. You have to be able to. If the United States is going to break up, you have to bracket to the idea of states going into complete revolt. We're already there, folks. So if I'm Trump, I ain't allowing Venezuela, Cuba, all of these other places to be. I'm not allowing any of that. I'm locking all that down to ensure that the trade routes of the Panama Canal, all of it. China the other day just came out and nixed BlackRock buying all the port assets around the Panama Canal, which happened a week after Trump and Xi had their little meeting. You think Trump and Xi are not on the same page? Of course they are. So like, what we're watching right now is literally that moment. We've been saying it for a while, but it's really here. Everything is being called in right now. And this government shutdown is about the midterms.
Okay. Before we go into that, I want to give Alex an opportunity.
Sure.
If you want, Alex, about Venezuela or comment on what Thomas said, follow up with that. You did say some time ago in a video that we did this absolutely wonderful explanation of how the drug trade is intimately tied with the banking network, which would take us back to the City of London.
Yes, correct. So, well, not only to the City of London, basically all the global systemically important banks are likely involved. I would be surprised if some of them were not. Basically, the reason why I don't buy the drugs argument for why Trump is attacking Venezuela is first of all, if you were really attacking the drugs network, your target number one would be the global money laundering banks, because without money laundering, the drugs trade would practically vanish. It would collapse into a small fraction of what it is today. And I can explain that. But your second target would be Ecuador, and your third target would be Canada.
I agree with Canada, absolutely. So yes.
Zero fentanyl goes into the United States from Venezuela.
Agreed.
And whatever else goes in there is, again, a fraction of what it used to be before Chavez. Because before Chavez, the CIA had their network in Venezuela, and they were the conduit for cocaine into the United States. The CIA was.
Yes.
Now, if you, not knowing this for sure, but if somebody asked me to speculate, I would say for sure Maduro has a hand in this. But the reason is because the CIA is in the drugs trade up to their eyeballs. That's who their enemies are. So if you wanted to have intelligence about your enemies, you would penetrate those networks. And so you would have your people in the drugs trade, because that's how you get close to your enemies, to collect the intelligence, to know what they're up to know what they're doing, who they are, where the stuff is moving, where the money is coming from, what weapons they have, what stuff they're dealing, and so forth. So I think, you like it or not, you would have to be involved with that. Now, going back to the money laundering banks, because this is who is actually the kingpin of the whole network. Why? Because I'll take the example of Mexican drug cartels. They sell about $400 million worth of stuff in the United States per week, every week. And this is cash trade. This is not credit card or wire transfers or checks or invoices. This is cash transactions. And so the Mexican drug cartels get about 400 million worth of cash every week. And then they have to transport this cash and store it somewhere. And then you have to keep it under guard in safe storage places, right? Safe warehouses. And then you have to pay armed men to guard your cash, right? And the thing with cash is that these armed guards could say, hey, why work for El Chapo Guzman when we can just take this money ourselves and start our own drug cartel? Kill off a bunch of his people and look at all these hundreds of millions that are just here under our noses. So there'll be a huge incentive to do that. Not only that, anybody with cash in hands has a certain power of the purse, right? Whatever that cash in their hand is. And so you'd have a lot of little aspiring cartel leaders wanting to pull in their own direction. And so that would be very destabilizing for the cartel. It would splinter immediately into 1,000 rival factions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, another problem with cash on pallets is that there's only so much stuff you can spend it on. So maybe you can buy a lot of champagne, caviar, maybe you can buy fancy cars, maybe you can buy villas, maybe you can pay prostitutes, but you're very limited in what you can use cash for. And at a certain point, the curve flattens. There's not much more that you can do with cash. And we know from official U.S. government investigative reports that these cartels have submarines, helicopter, howitzers, they have anti-tank missiles, they have all kinds of stuff. They maintain real armies with which they fight against the Mexican government. And that takes a lot of money, and it can't be paid by cash. You can't buy a submarine with cash. You can't buy a helicopter with cash. So to do all that, you need to have money in a clean bank account. And then once the money is in a clean bank account, there's a signatory to that account, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then only that guy has the power of the purse, because everybody else gets the money from him. The payrolls come through him. And in that sense, the bank anoints the leader of the cartel. They say, Mr. El Chapo Guzman, you're the man. We only recognize your signature and maybe your CFO's signature to authorize these transactions. You're buying a helicopter? Well, very well. With your signature, we'll make that payment. You need to meet the payrolls for the troops, for all your thugs there? Very well. That's all being done, and that's all going to be paid. No questions asked. And so in that way, the bank is actually it is who creates the whole hierarchy and reinforces it, because they designate the guy whose signatures they recognize, and he can use the money that's in the account clean, and he's the only man with the power of the purse in the organization. The banks can't not know what this is. They have the know your customer legal obligation. These people turn so much money that even the CEO of the bank in London or on Wall Street must know who this is, what this money is represents, where it's coming from, and they would have to even go inspect these, whatever facilities that produce this money. So there's no chance, there's no defense that the CEO of Barclays or Bank of America could say like, oh, we didn't know, we thought this was a Mexican construction company or corn
laundromat or whatever. Yes.
Yeah. So the banks know, they absolutely know, and they are they anoint the leaders of the cartel. And then also, if the banks get abusive, let's say they take 30% for money laundering services, so you bring them $100 million, you get 70, they get 30, and then one day decide, you know what, I think from now on it's going to be 50-50. We're going to take half. What is he going to do then? Is he going to shoot the bank manager? He can do that. But the people on Wall Street or in London, they don't care. They're going to appoint another CEO. The bank, nothing happens to the bank. You can go shoot all the personnel in the bank. Right. You didn't kill the bank. You just killed a bunch of people who work there. So the bank is completely separate from the dirty and ugly business of drug dealing. But by providing the money laundering service, they make the whole thing possible. Without the money laundering service, the nature of the problem is such that the cartels would instantly splinter. Mm-hmm. They would probably eliminate themselves between themselves by fighting one faction against the other, and whatever's remained would probably be relatively easy for law enforcement to mop up and clean out. And so that's where you attack the drugs trade, first and foremost, and then maybe major hubs like Canada and Ecuador. I do believe that eventually they're going to get around to it, because I did watch a podcast in which one of Trump's FBI agents was actually talking about all this. But he was talking about it with respect to Canada. Yep. That was a couple of months ago when they busted an absolutely massive fentanyl lab in Canada. They said this thing was absolutely huge, and a lot of fentanyl was coming into the United States from there, and we know that it's not the only one. And then in that whole interview, he also made this whole argument about the banks. It's the banks. The banks are the kingpin of this whole thing, whole operation, which tells me that the Trump administration, people at the, in the FBI or wherever, know exactly the problem that they're dealing with. Whatever the reason is, they're running a fake war now, in a similar way that they were running a fake war against Ansar Allah in Yemen. After Ansar Allah's being bombed for 10 years, Trump suddenly decides, now we're going to bomb them like nobody's ever seen before, and all this talk. And then what happened with that? Nothing. They did bomb a bunch of shit, because I guess they have to make it look real and credible. People have to believe that it's for real, but it obviously wasn't. Ansar Allah is still in power, and there's no war anymore. And so I don't know what the deal is with Venezuela. I'm
Alex, just on Yemen, Trump signed an agreement with Yemen that he wouldn't bomb them anymore, and there was nothing in that agreement that said that they couldn't bomb Israel. So they were free to bomb Israel.
Yeah, exactly. Great point. In fact, things are not as they seem. So we have to pay very close attention and not jump to conclusions. And right now, the whole story about Venezuela offers very obvious conclusions, very tempting to jump to. But I think we need to give it more time and see what happens. I personally don't believe that Trump is sincerely interested in regime change in Venezuela. And I think it probably won't happen. And
I concur with that instinct, Alex. And I'll say the reason why I say that is I think I saw something. I think the Atlantic put out something today that an unsourced rumor that Maduro's offered to step down as long as he gets his, a nice private island to he gets the Zelensky treatment, right? Salted to taste. I'm just putting it out there. The Atlantic put that out today. Okay. So this morning we were discussing that a little bit. This could also be another way of beginning the process of whatever vestige there is of intelligence operations, Western intelligence agencies still operating in Venezuela, right? And Maduro at this point has not, is still negotiating with Trump to get out from underneath all this. Again, you're trying, if someone's trying to paint what Trump is doing in Venezuela as a regime change war, which they tried for the first 2 weeks that this was a thing, did anybody not notice that? To the point of even like creating fake AI videos of Tulsi Gabbard saying, I saw those for a while. I'm like, oh, really? Okay, that's interesting. The point being is then it probably tells you that this is more about, again, let's go back to what you're saying ultimately is we have to destroy the money conduit. You got to, in some ways you have to say, I'm going to raise the cost of moving the stuff around and the money and everything else around to the point where it's not worth anybody staying on board with it anymore. The Canadian bank angle is very, very important. It's really important. I know Matt has talked about this in terms of all the Canadian banks are guilty here. Every one of them, they all work for the crown in this respect. And it's always been that way. And again, unless Trump can figure out how to navigate his current domestic problem with an obstructionist Congress that will impeach him for being Donald Trump tomorrow if they could get away with it. That's why these things have not progressed at all. So you put, the ships off the coast, you blow up some boats, you let everybody know that, they have submarines trailing behind these fishing boats, and the submarines are full of drugs, or they're full of these guys, or whatever. They're pulling dead. They're doing. They have tug subs behind these boats. FYI, so there can be fishermen up top, and then there's a sub in the water. By the way, okay, and for anybody to it's all about the oil. Again, it's not about the oil. Trump's opening up the ANWR, the Alaska National Wildlife Reserve. I've already heard floating rumors that they've already started the pre-production work on the Bering Strait Tunnel.
Seriously?
Has already started. I saw this last week. I don't know. Again, salted to taste. I've seen it, whether it's true or not. I think the Russians in the United States are already well in advance on all of this stuff, and it's just a matter of getting us politically to the finish line. I mean, when Besson came out the other day and said that the Chinese unilaterally came up and said, "Yeah, we would be very interested in buying Alaskan oil from you." Trump has already signed the contracts and signed the deals to move to build the highway and the rail. You think he's not going to take fucking Alberta, people? Of course he is. This is coming. He's not going to stop. And it's going to happen. It's just a matter of, and this is why I'm watching the incredible amount of PSYOP that's happening right now. And it's like, I don't know what to make of Tucker Carlson. I don't know what to make of anybody at this point. I can tell you who Candace Owens works for, but everything since Charlie Kirk was killed, City of London, by the way. Hey everyone, this is Tom Luongo. Listen, Crypto Rich is one of my oldest friends in this business, and he absolutely deserves your likes, your shares, your supports, and all of anything you can do to give him your time and attention. He is by far one of my favorite people in this space. So do the thing and keep your stick on the ice.